This is the story of a year in the life of Fred Burnell and his garden. He lives in the outer suburbs of London with his daughter Barbara and her family, and before his retirement, he spent many happy and industrious years at the Royal Botanic Gardens in Kew, where he worked in one of the great greenhouses as a Grade 1 gardener. As well as his practical work, he studied in his spare time and earned the respect of his curators. Now, like most gardeners, Fred's year begins in the uninspiring winter season when the plants and trees are dormant except for those in the greenhouse. Even so, when the temperature drops in the late afternoons, Fred has to light the paraffin heater because he has to adequately maintain the temperature at a level of about 4 degrees centigrade, which is just high enough to ensure the survival of the plants. Being a careful man, he first of all makes sure the lamp is clean and the wick trimmed, because this ensures a blue frame for maximum efficiency. And for old hands like Fred, this kind of cheap heating has been used for years with good effect. The sun is now melting the snow, but Fred soon spots that it has failed to make any impression on the thick layer of ice which covers the fish pond. Now this will kill the fish unless he acts quickly. So with a kettle of water he melts a circle of ice to enable them to breathe. Now he never breaks the ice by force, because if he did so the shock waves would kill the fish. As soon as the frost has relaxed its grip on the land, Fred starts to assess the extent of the winter damage and begins to put it right. Walnut trees grow to about 15 meters and need only a minimum of pruning. With older trees, pruning is merely the task of removing any dead wood or awkwardly hanging branches, and this should be done between November and February when the sap rises, using a lightweight pruning saw. Walnut trees are tolerant of a wide variation in soil conditions, although they have a slight preference for alkaline soils. Extremes of dryness or wetness are not very satisfactory, but almost anything else will produce a good tree. After he's pruned, Fred uses a sealing compound to prevent infection of the wood. Now, around about the same time, he shortens the tips of his raspberry canes by about 30 centimeters, because this encourages the production of more prolific fruit-bearing side shoots. As the ground slowly starts to warm up, the rhubarb pushes its shoots up through the soil, and the rhubarb season lasts from mid-spring to late summer. The hard crust of soil caused by the ravages of winter has to be broken down first. This is now early March, so a healthy scattering of general fertilizer is applied around the crowns. It's then forked lightly into the soil, where it'll slowly decompose and release its nutrients. The fertilizer contains nitrogen for leaf and stem growth, phosphorus for early root stimulation, and potassium for the general efficiency of plant processes. After this, Fred turns his attention to the lawn. It appears to be in order, but a closer inspection by his very practiced eye reveals that clover and weeds have entwined themselves into the texture of the grass. So now he uses a springbok rake to remove it all, working the surface in different directions for the best part of a day. This done, the lawn is finally ready to be aerated. This should be done about mid-March with a border fork to lift the grass and allow air and moisture to penetrate down to the roots. 30-centimetre gaps will suffice. It's a tedious job, but it pays dividends in the end. It's not only tedious, it's a bit tiring, so after it's finished, it's pleasant to be able to relax for a while and look at the snowdrops and the crocuses that are now bringing a touch of colour back to the garden and heralding the advent of spring. You'll see the raspberries are shooting well now and will continue to do so if fertiliser is applied early in the new season. Fred uses a border fork to loosen the soil, but being very careful not to damage the shallow roots. Raspberries do best in a sunny site, and they'll continue to be fruitful for at least 12 years if carefully looked after. Fred's method is to apply plenty of sulfate of potash to improve fruitfulness and flavour. The elements will take it down to the roots. And like rhubarb, the Royal Sovereign strawberry plant is a hardy perennial, because only the worst winter will kill it off. The cropping life of the plant is short, though. And strawberry beds are usually replanted with fresh stock after 1 to 4 seasons. Again, Fred forks general fertilizer gently into the soil where it will slowly release its nutrients. But his next job is much more arduous. The winter weather has really compacted the soil of the salad patch, and he can't postpone digging it over. He first makes a trench at one end of the plot, 1 spade deep. Then he transfers the soil by wheelbarrow to the other end for later use. The next row of soil can be turned over directly into the empty trench, you see, and this exercise is repeated row after row until the far end of the plot is reached. With the last row turned over, the soil in the wheelbarrow is used to fill the remaining trench. Fred makes it look very easy. Now it's time to give the lawn its first cut of the season. Again, Fred ensures the blades of his mower are clean before plugging it in, and preferably using a circuit breaker for safety. Never forget this. And to make the grass look even neater, he trims the edges, a part of the ritual some gardeners overlook. He doesn't forget to pick up the cuttings, so be like Fred, neatness in everything. The plants here in the south of England are 4 to 6 weeks in advance of those in the north, of course. Spring is now well into its stride, so the temperature can soar without warning, and proper ventilation is essential. At the same time, regular watering is most important. Fred is at the first stage of the tomato growing process, filling his pots with John Innes No. 1 compost, ready for the seeds, which on this occasion are Moneymaker and Alicante. Make sure the compost is lightly firmed down before sowing. always use labels. Now, these are essential if mistakes are to be avoided later. Water them well, and then put them into the airing cupboard, covered with glass where a temperature of 18 degrees centigrade is needed. And, by the way, a daily inspection is advisable, as they need light when they germinate. One other thing, it's not enough to leave the lawn to nature. Fred always feeds his with a homemade fertilizer containing 2 1/4 kilos of sulfate of ammonia and 1 kilo each of iron sulfate, bone meal, superphosphate, and sulfate of potash. He mixes all this thoroughly with 1 13.5 litre bucket of peat and the same quantity of sifted soil, mixing them together until they're all evenly distributed. He will then put 1 good handful per square metre. And to do this, he marks out the lawn in square metres. And this is to ensure that the fertilizer is scattered evenly, and it virtually guarantees a uniform growth. You'll see that after only a week, there's a marked improvement. By now, the time is mid-May. The rhubarb has performed splendidly, and Barbara is pulling the first of the season, always leaving 3 or 4 stems on the plant. Some will be used immediately, and the remainder put in the deep freeze. Now the salad plot is ready for seed sowing. To do this, Fred stands on a board, which evenly distributes his weight and doesn't compact the soil. He carefully marks out the line where he wants to sow the seeds and then makes a shallow trench with a small fork. After that, he taps the radish seeds out of the packet, spreading them evenly along the length of the trench. The soil is then pulled back into the trench and lightly firmed down. He repeats this process with the other seeds. The next row takes spring onions, and the last one the lettuce, cabbage, fortune. It's better to sow 1 row every 2 weeks for continuous salad throughout the season. On the other hand, he sows the runner beans in pots to give them an early start. The variety he favours is called Enorma. About the end of May, Fred gently loosens the soil around the edge of the tomato seedlings. He fills a pot with John Innes No. 1 compost and carefully lifts out a seedling by its leaves, never the stem, then settles it firmly in its new home. He always makes sure the soil in which they're set is very damp but not saturated. Then the growing process accelerates. Within a week or 2, a larger pot is needed to secure them. This time the compost used is John Innes No. 3. Tomatoes always need plenty of watering, but not a saturated soil. Pots need daily watering, but in hot weather twice daily is essential, morning and evening. And before very long, the greenhouse has to be cleared to make room for the tomato plants. Overwinter shingle is bagged and stored for the summer. Then the metal staging is dismantled, so that the plants can now be tied into an elevated position. firmly, but not too tightly is his rule. Now, although the spring flowers are flourishing under glass, they can't be taken for granted. A sudden hot spell of sunshine can cause scorching, so a coating of summer cloud is applied onto the glass. This will deflect some of the sun's rays and hence keep the greenhouse cooler than it would have otherwise have been. Fred has laid out the line where the runner beans are to be planted and levels the soil, and then applies a dressing of blood, fish and bone. Blood is a stimulant for producing rapid growth. Fish contains nitrogen, and bone is a slow-acting fertilizer. He plants his runner beans 45 centimeters apart. And you'll be able to see when they're ready for planting out from the amount of root growth. Once all the beans have been planted, canes are pushed firmly into the ground to support them. 2 canes are then placed along the top and all tied firmly together, because Fred hopes there'll be a lot of growth to support. Then he has an inspection of the strawberries, and this establishes they're fruiting well. So now he spreads the straw thickly but evenly around the plants to buffer them from potentially damp ground and rodents like mice, who tend to like strawberries, as indeed we all do. The daffodils have finished flowering, and so as soon as the space is needed, they're dug up and placed in an odd corner to dry off. He's decided to replace the daffodils with marigolds and geraniums, evenly spaced. He firms down the soil after inserting the plant, trying not to leave any pockets of air that could fill up with water. A lot of people don't realize that a strong sun will dry out the soil much quicker than they imagine. So again, regular watering is essential if the flowers are to look their best. And don't neglect the raspberries either. They need water to keep them flowering, because without good flowers, the insects won't pollinate and you won't get much fruit. Fred prefers to grow his lettuces under cloches to protect them from the frost, which can make a surprise visit quite late in the season. They need to be thinned out early, and he has no compunction about weeding out the most feeble plants. All lettuces require warmth, moisture, and a weed-free environment with protection from garden pests. As you can see, the leaves of the runner beans have already been attacked by slugs. So Fred liberally scatters slug pellets to try and control them. As we come up to the middle of June, this is the best time to plant the outdoor tomatoes. Fred secures his tomato plants firmly into the soil and secures their future with strong stakes. And doesn't forget the water. Now, alas, the runner beans are under a second wave of attack, this time from black fly. To kill the black fly, Fred uses a systemic insecticide for this, mixing it with a little washing up liquid, because this helps it stick to the plants. He sprays it thoroughly at a time when the sun is not shining, so as to eliminate the risk of scorching. Of course, strawberry picking is the highlight of the year, and the fruit are in excellent condition. One thing Fred believes in is relaxation. And this is an essential part of gardening. Never become a slave to routine is his motto. Too much endeavor will drain your enthusiasm, and we don't want that. Summer begins with an extravaganza of roses. Raspberries are ready for harvesting, but they should be looked at daily. Always pick them when the fruit is dry. Now this applies to all soft fruit. Since the garden is always under attack, Fred now finds a plague of aphids intent on devouring the Victoria plum tree. As we've already seen, a resourceful gardener will be armed in advance with a plentiful supply of insecticides. This is absorbed into the sap of the tree as against a contact insecticide which kills the insect on contact. With systemic, the aphids suck up the sap and poison. Using a pump sprayer, he can direct a powerful jet up to the highest branches and nothing will escape. Again, this shouldn't be done in strong sunlight. Pest control is almost an art in itself. These dirty pots, for instance. They'll harbour unseen diseases, spreading organisms, unless they are thoroughly washed in a household disinfectant. When blooms fade, they should be cut off, as this prevents the plants from expending needless energy in forming seeds. It also helps to keep the garden neater, by the way. When the strawberries have all finished, remove the straw and take it to the compost heap. This tidies up the bed. At the height of the season, the lawn should be cut for the second time in a week if necessary. But when using any electric machine, always keep the power cable well away from the blades. Although it's easy to use, it has to be kept clean. But only do this after disconnecting the power cable. Now, some people prefer to leave the grass cuttings on the ground as mulch, but Fred prefers to sweep them off. It's all a matter of taste. Next, the weeds in the lawn must be removed by Fred using a simple tool called a daisy grubber. It's easy to use and it digs out deep roots. Although the runner beans are growing prolifically, with the hot weather they still need water to stimulate their growth, so don't forget this. Watering is best carried out early mornings or late evenings, otherwise the plants will be scorched by the sun. Mains water coming under pressure is highly charged with oxygen, which is beneficial for plants. But don't forget the tubs and the hanging baskets. They need watering daily as well to keep them in tip-top condition. Fred's tomato plants are now very impressive, 2 meters in height and watered twice a day in hot weather, morning and evening. To help them even further, Fred feeds them with a liquid fertilizer, using a brand you can buy in most garden stores, which is high in potash. 2 capfuls to 9 liters of water. This should be done about every 6 or 7 days, not more frequently, as overfeeding can be just as harmful and it won't make them ripen any faster. The loganberries are now ready for picking. They're excellent for cooking, freezing and jam making. They also make an interesting dessert if eaten fully ripe. Lilium regale is a little gem of a flower with a beautiful perfume, and it occupies a special place in Fred's garden. You'll notice that these tomatoes are 4 to 6 weeks later than those under glass. The strawberry runners are ready to be pegged out, but before doing so, be sure and check that the parent plants are free of pest and disease. The runners will increase the number of plants and thereby improve the crop. So Fred sinks a pot filled with John Innes No. 1 into the ground and selects a good strong runner to peg in. He repeats the operation as many times as he thinks necessary, then cuts away any runners left over. Fred seems to be very pleased with his tomato crop because they're exceeding all expectations. The climbing masquerade rose has faded blooms, and these are cut off at the first bud. This has a twofold purpose. First, to prevent seed formation, and secondly, of course, to encourage more flowers. By now, the raspberries have completely finished fruiting, and it's time to prune out all the exhausted stems. This year's new growth can be tied in vertically, ready for next year's crop. Once again, Barbara assists in picking the plums. Fred grows his outdoor tomatoes to 4 trusses and finds this is ample. The bottom trusses ripen first. Now a few Lisbon white onions are pulled for the salad. The runner beans are still cropping well and will continue to do so if they're picked regularly. Leave them too long and they become hard and stringy and almost uneatable. Now normally the fish pond is cleaned out every 3rd year, but this summer the blanket weed is so dense that Fred has to clean it out completely. His first task is to remove the goldfish. Then an electric pump is prepared to empty out the water, which in fact in Fred's little pond is about 450 litres. It's always worth remembering that water and electricity don't mix except with fatal results, so be very careful. This is the only way to reduce the water level, and the contents aren't wasted but spread around the garden. The algae clinging to the sides must be scrubbed completely off before refilling. Once finished, the pond is restocked with plants and water snails, and the fish are then returned to their rightful home. And this job will take about the best part of a day, if done properly. The loganberries have yielded excellent fruit, and now is the time to prune out all their old stems. And the next stage is to tie in the new growth horizontally, ready for next year's crop. As the summer draws to a close, the geraniums begin to die off, and the dead blooms are removed to make the plants look tidy. The ice plant is very attractive and attracts the small tortoiseshell butterfly and other insects. The late summer sun is rarely strong enough to ripen the tomatoes, so Fred decides now is the right time to remove the summer cloud from the greenhouses, which will speed up the process of ripening. Like most careful gardeners, he ensures that the steps are in a secure position before mounting them. It's not that easy to remove the summer cloud, so the broom must be kept well soaked. And finally, a sponge finishes the job off. And when the heat of the sun has diminished too much to assist ripening, he cuts the tomatoes down. He arranges them in manageable lengths to hang in the greenhouse and ripen off further. And when a space is being cleared, he replaces the staging, ready for the winter plants. The boards are positioned back on top and covered with a clean sheet of plastic. Now he's washed out the gravel in strong disinfectant. to exterminate any hidden pests that may have accumulated during the summer, and spreads it out evenly on top of the bench. Like many of us, Fred has a soft spot for geraniums, and he's always sorry to see them die off. But if he takes plenty of cuttings now, even though some may perish in the winter, there's bound to be continuity. After trimming away the leaves, he cuts each stem to about 10 or 12 centimeters below the node of the last leaf. The pots he fills with John Innes No. 1, topped with a sprinkle of silver sand. Then he dips the cuttings into hormone rooting powder before placing them into the pots and firming them down. And he usually fits 4 or 5 into a 10-centimeter pot. It's been a good summer for Fred's chrysanthemums, and the buds on the plants are numerous. Some of these have to be removed if good quality blooms are to be obtained, and he must ensure that the center bud is always left intact, because this is the one which will invariably produce the best flower. Autumn is always a season of contrasting colors and chores in the garden. There are late blooms to be enjoyed, even the seed pods are attractive. And of course, some harvesting to be done. When Fred picks his conference pears, they're still hard and must be stored in shallow boxes in a dry place until they ripen. But he makes sure to check them every day. Then, before the first frost arrives, which is any time from September onwards, the outdoor tomatoes must be cut down in the same way as the indoor plants. He burns all the old plants, including the roots, just in case of disease. He hangs these outdoor tomatoes on a wire to ripen off, which incidentally helps them keep their flavor, and also to have fresh tomatoes for an extra month. Once the husk of the walnuts begin to crack, they too must be collected and stored in peat to keep them moist. Walnut trees, unfortunately, take 15 to 20 years before cropping. Sadly, the bountiful days are visibly telescoping into winter. Seed pods have formed on the Lilium regale, and Fred, ever an opportunist, will not let them perish with the year. He collects them in a paper bag and ties it up tight to keep the pods dry, not forgetting to label and store in a dry place. He'll sow these again in February and expect the flowers to arrive within 3 years. He usually saves the salvia seeds in the same manner. Now, even though the geraniums are finished flowering and must be dug up to make way for the spring bulbs, they won't be turned out onto the compost heap. He keeps them in a box of damp peat as an insurance in case any of the cuttings die off. His next task is to collect the rubbish and trim the edge of the lawn before digging the soil over. One of Fred's last tasks is to replace the nutrients in the soil with blood, fish and bone. And then he plans out a spring show of daffodils, planting the bulbs about 8 centimeters below the surface. He makes up his mind he'll plant more perennials next spring to save himself getting overtired in the late season. And here you see the result of debudding the chrysanthemums earlier in the year. The intensifying cold weather has totally devastated the runner beans, and they have to be cleared. Alternatively, you can leave their tuberous roots in the ground. They're rich in nitrogen and will improve the soil for the following year. But the bean stems are too hard for compost, so they are bagged up for later disposal. Once all the leaves are being collected, Fred will have a few weeks to put up his feet and contemplate the future of the garden. Maybe new plants are required. And a second greenhouse wouldn't take up too much space, would it? Or even a conservatory. And so the year ends for Fred Burnell, full of positive thoughts and dreams of an ever more flourishing tomorrow, which is where we all came in.